Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week our guest is Bulwark author and former political director for Republicans Against Trump, communications director to Jeb Bush, and RNC spokesman in the reverse order, Tim Miller. Remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. Please check out the links to this week's sponsors, Magic Spoon and Miracle Brand, in the show notes. We thank you for supporting our sponsors. It helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. James, there are a few things that are more American than a 4th of July parade. They're held in hamlets all across this land. Then this weekend, Highland Park, Illinois, was holding one of those parades when 7 people were slaughtered by a 21-year-old with an assault rifle during their celebration. That's less than 2 months after an 18-year-old killed 19 little children and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas, with an assault rifle, and a 18-year-old in Buffalo killed 10 shoppers in a supermarket with an assault rifle. You know, with over 300 shootings in this country this year, first half of the year, tragically, this too has become an American tradition. And you know, the apologists for the gun lobby say it's a mental health problem. You know, well, yeah, we have a mental health problem in America, no question. So does Canada, so does UK, so does Germany. But they don't have an epidemic of mass murders with assault weapons the way we do. Congress approved a very modest gun control measure, James, which we talked about last week. I give them credit for that. Doesn't do a whole lot, but it's better than nothing. It may save a few lives. They ought to do more on assault weapons and universal background checks. Mitch McConnell won't allow that. So Democrats this fall, I really think, on the margins, have a winning issue campaigning on common sense gun legislation. Unlike the past, with these murders happening every few days, I don't think it's going to fade from memory.
Well, I mean, let's just back up. I never tire pointing out from 1994, thanks to Joe Biden and Bill Clinton, we actually had an assault weapons ban for 10 years. It's not radical. All right, it was done. We lived. And you know what happened during that? People hunted, people went to marksmanship classes, people had gun clubs, had everything. All right, maybe that's idealistic and unrealistic. This is going to keep happening. It's not going to stop. There's no, you're right, mental health drives some of this. I think this whole incel movement has something behind it, whatever the argument is. As long as these are available, people are going to use them, and they're going to use them like this. And I'll just say one thing politically, because that's what I deal in. I remind people when they talk about the economy stupid and change versus more the same is actually the first thing. The third thing is don't forget health care. My advice to Democrats every day, don't forget guns. Everybody's chasing the Dobbs decision, as they should. It's a very important thing. It's the elimination of a right that people had for 50 years. I cannot tell you how many people I talk to that deal with this every day that tell me the gun shit is as big as the abortion stuff. And we should never, ever forget that. And we're not going to get an assault weapon ban. I understand that, but we should talk about it. And the public is so with us on this. You cannot believe it. And it's really not that complicated. And I hate to say this, but we know this is going to happen again and again and again. We know it's going to happen when these kids come back to school. We know that. And, you know, there's only one thing that you can do when you're faced with something like this. You have to press for political advantage. I hate that. They say, well, you're taking tragedy and turning it into politics. You know, the Republican nominee for governor of Illinois was told about this before they even caught the guy. And he says, let's say a prayer and let's move on. No, don't move on. Let's talk about it. It's important. It's critical. Lives are being lost. People's whole emotional life is being utterly ruined by this. Let's politicize this issue.
Well, what has happened in the past, even with awful incidents like we witnessed over the past 6 weeks, is it happens, there's a hue and cry, people are outraged, and then we get to the election, it becomes the 7th or 8th or 10th or 16th most important issue for those people, whereas the other side, which is, as you say, in the distinct minority, man, that's everything for them. I think this is different this time, to an extent at least, because it's happening so often. It's happening so tragically. I mean, little school children and the 4th of July. I mean, is there any place that's safe? So I think if it's played right by proponents and they don't start getting distracted by other, crazy issues, I'm for an assault weapons ban. But if you think somehow it ought to be, we ought to start first with just lowering the age or raising the age to 21, okay, that's the first step. But universal background checks, this is an issue you can run on in most places in America.
Absolutely. And don't fall into the trap of we shouldn't politicize this. This was a political act. These things were banned. Let me repeat that. They were banned for 10 years. And, they basically came back and there was not much more than a whimper of protests from people, all right? This needs to be politicized. It is the only way this problem will ever be solved is through politics. I hate to tell you that, but that's the truth. It's not going to be solved through prayer. It's not going to be solved through thoughts. It's not going to be solved by anything else. It's going to be solved when the public says, I want this shit to stop. Only then.
Speaking of politics, James, let me add one more thing to that. I think the most important thing that those Democrats mainly, but gun control proponents can do is reach out to young people, the 18 to 34-year-olds who are passive voters and aren't as likely to turn out, and tell them the stakes they have with guns and abortion. A fascinating Monmouth poll came out this week, which showed that Joe Biden is underwater among those 18 to 34-year-old voters, a 63-28 disapproval. They've just pretty much written him off. Normally you'd say, okay, that's really bad news for Democrats. But when you ask them, which party do you want to control Congress, it was 59-34 Democrats. Reach out. That is a key voting block for people who care about guns, abortion, and Democrats this fall.
Absolutely. And who cares what they think about anything? As long as they come out and vote. It would take 90 seconds for just a little political tutorial here. About 7% of the country are true independents. Trust me, I'm right on this. I don't want to waste my time explaining it. So there are 4 categories of voters. Voters that are high propensity to vote will vote for you. Voters that are high propensity to vote will vote against you. Voters with a low propensity to vote that will vote for you. Low propensity to vote against you. The single most important block, obviously, are a low propensity to vote and a high propensity to vote for you. That is the definition of 18 to 34s. You're so right. You're exactly right. And also, just as a matter of simple math, if their share is, let's assume that their normal expected share is 16. If that goes to 18, that's more than a 2-point jump because it all has to add up to 100, so another demographic has to lose 2 points. You can win an election on that. Do the math. It's not that complicated, but I don't want to spend my time explaining to you. It is the key to everything. I genuinely believe that. I'm like evangelical on this.
Yep, I agree totally. James, the Fulton County DA has subpoenaed little Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina, Rudy Giuliani, and 5 of the clown lawyers who work with him to try to steal an election after 2020. How serious is that investigation, do you think?
Well, I'll tell you how serious it is. So just like I said to you, Jeff Sessions is the orchestrator of Cassidy Hutchinson and all of the stuff that comes after. And remember the movie The Graduate where they said one word, Benjamin? I'm going to give you one word.
Plastics.
RICO. RICO. Georgia has, I am told, reliably and informatively, one of the most aggressive state RICO statutes in the United States. I'd love for someone to do a legislative history on it because I'm sure it was some anti-black thing they came up with.
Yeah.
But the existing law on the books in Georgia is very broadly construed to bring a RICO indictment. And remember a couple of points I want to make. Under RICO, you don't have to show intent. And that was drafted by a Notre Dame law professor, and that is what John Gleason and those used to bring the mafia down. If you remember, that was the whole thing that brought the entire mafia down.
Right.
The second point I want to make about this, and this is very important, the grand jury that's been impaneled does not have the ability to indict, but it was impaneled specifically to gather evidence. It has been authorized by the Georgia courts. At a point, they will turn this evidence over to a regular grand jury. And people, knowledgeable people, believe that given the way that this statute is written and the elements that are required for a conviction are much more favorable than you think. So just remember, you heard it here because you're going to hear this a lot going forward. RICO is the word.
And you think this ultimately reaches to Trump, for sure?
Well, okay, how can I say for sure? But do I think it? Yes, and I think and I think it's gonna get a lot of people involved. It's gonna get the fake electors involved. You already have, like Lindsey Graham says, he's not going to comply with the subpoena. Well, I got news for you. You know, in America, you don't have that choice. You just don't get a subpoena and say I'm not going to comply with it. Right. Not from a legally impaneled grand jury, which this is. And I got to tell you that when they took me through this RICO statute, and this is somebody that doesn't have anything to do with the investigation, but is very knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. And I think you're going to start reading a lot about the Georgia RICO statute.
Yeah. James, I wonder why Lindsey Graham doesn't want to obey that subpoena. I think I have an idea. Maybe we can visit that later.
No, I can tell you why. He doesn't want to go to jail.
Yeah.
That's right. That's pretty simple. Neither would you and neither would I, but we're not guilty of anything.
That's right. I'm
not worried about the RICO statute.
We'll come back to RICO, guys. Remember it out there, RICO.
Right, RICO.
Hey, James, the political climate has been pretty gloomy for Democrats for the last 6 months. You see it changing?
I do, and we talked about this, and I see it and this is not just one source. I didn't talk to a guy who talked to a guy. I've talked to a lot of different guys, and I'm pretty confident it's gotten 3 to 5 points better. Still not the greatest in the world, but is. And there was you don't want to place too much stock in this, but there actually was a special a Senate seat in Nebraska, in a district that Trump carried by 15. The Republicans won it, but won it by 6. We have been around long enough to know that these canaries in the coal mine warrant further investigation. I'm not saying that it's definitive, but this is not what we would believe that the political climate would be much more favorable for Republicans now than it was in 2020. I think there's evidence to bear that out. It does seem that there's been an underlying change. And the other thing is I hope I'm wrong on this, but I suspect there's going to be more shootings. And these abortion legislation is going to keep coming up because in a lot of states it's unclear what the actual law is. And so this story is not going away. This is going to be a evolving story. And this is also true in Georgia that I know. If I told you that I talked to somebody knowledgeable about Georgia politics this morning, you would be safe to assume that. And they're going to have to deal with that.
James, I think there's one other element. Traditionally, for midterm elections, a very important leading indicator was the president's approval rating. Biden's got a terrible approval rating. I'm not sure it's as relevant this year. I'm not sure that it may not reflect the extent people say, okay, Joe Biden, he's yesterday, not a bad guy, but, not that great a president. I'm not sure that's going to affect down ballot elections as much as it has in the past. It's going to make a difference. You'd much rather have them at 47 or 48 than at 39 or 40. But I think there may be some Democratic candidates who can survive a relatively low Biden approval rating, assuming that inflation's a little bit better in the fall.
Let me pose a question to our audience and just think of yourself. When you think about who has more power in this country, do you believe it's President Biden and the congressional Democrats, or do you believe it's the Supreme Court and Mitch McConnell? Ask yourself that question. Mm-hmm. Just mull on that a second. When it comes to real power, who do you think has more? Because we're accustomed to believing that, generally the president and Congress have all of this inherent power. Of course, the congressional majorities barely exist. I don't know how to explain that to people. And the Supreme Court is exercising ruthless power constantly and continuously and will continue to do so. And Mitch McConnell is so powerful that he can even dictate judicial appointments by President Biden. So I think your point is right, is correct, is potentially correct and potentially well taken. And that youth poll that you cited that I did not know about buttresses that case even further.
Yeah, it sure does. And let's not forget, it was Mitch McConnell who for a year changed the size of the Supreme Court. He decided it was an 8-member, not a 9-member Supreme Court.
That is correct, as our dear friend Walter Dellinger, who we miss by every minute, not every day.
Every day I think about him. Hey, James, who doesn't love cereal? The crunch, the sweetness, the way you can accidentally eat a whole box or sneak it as a midnight snack. And Magic Spoon has truly innovated and changed the game by taking out the sugar and upping the protein. They've perfected the crunchy texture with an astounding variety of flavors that always hit the spot, but without any of the things that are bad for you. There's a flavor for everyone, from the richest chocolate to the sweetest honey nut. It's got 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 to 5 net grams of carbs in each serving. Magic Spoon is low-carb, keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and only 140 calories a serving. You can build your own box with a huge variety of incredible flavors. You'll love the classics like cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter that taste just like you remember. Let me give you a tip. Mix cocoa and peanut butter for a real dose of nostalgia. Then they've got the cult favorites, blueberry muffin, maple waffle, and honey nut for sweet pastry notes or a smoky, syrupy finish. You win no matter what with these, and don't forget the indulgent ones, cookies and cream and cinnamon roll. So tell cakes and cookies to move aside. Magic Spoon cereal got this one covered, and it covers the whole age range from my 4-year-old grandchild to James Carville and Al Hunt. I'm not going to mention what that range is, but it's pretty big, James.
Yeah, actually, until this product came out, I never much gave a shit about cereal. I think Cheerios taste like crap, to be honest with you. You can put enough bananas on them to get by, but that's about all you can do. Same thing with Frosted Flakes and that other garbage. I assume that shredded wheat is good for you. I've tried to force myself to eat it. I've never been very successful. And this stuff comes along, and it's literally borderline addictive, and it really tastes good, and it packs real nutritional punch. I think this is a real, almost miraculous product that these people have come up with. It's an amazing product, honestly.
And you can have it for breakfast, you can have it for an afternoon snack, or you can have it before you go to bed at night.
Anything you want.
Yeah, exactly.
You can pop it in your mouth while you're doing a podcast, too. I'll get my bowl over there before this is over.
So go to magicspoon.com/war room to grab a custom bundle of cereal and try the magic for yourself. And be sure to use our promo code War Room at checkout to save $5 off your order. And Magic Spoon is so confident of their product, it's backed with 100% happiness guarantee. Let me repeat that, 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/war room and use the code WARROOM to save $5 off, and you can look for the link in our show notes. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. Hey, Tim Miller has written Why We Did It, chronicling his rise in Republican ranks and followed by his revulsion of Donald Trump and emergence as a leading critic of Trump and the GOP. Tim, I'm going to confess I've only glanced at the book, though I've seen your comments, and I'm a loyal subscriber and huge fan of your work with the Bulwark. So I am prepared, I hope.
Well, thank you, Al. I saved some goodies for the loyal Bulwark subscribers in the book, to keep you interested. So when you get a chance this summer when you're at the beach, I think you're going to enjoy it.
I'm going to do it. I've started and I'm going to finish it. As an old guy, I covered Ronald Reagan, and I recall Republicans back then feeling they finally had a hero. Democrats had FDR and JFK, and it was authentic. Reagan was their hero. But Reagan's hold on the party was nothing compared to Trump's. A man of no social or moral worth. How in God's name did he become so dominant, Tim?
Well, there's a little book called Why We Did It that I talk about all of this. But no, look, here's the short of it. Unfortunately, I think there was a much bigger part of the base, not the entire Republican Party. I don't want to smear everybody in the Republican Party, but a much bigger part of the base than we realized that was motivated much more by grievance, by animus against the other side, animus against elites, against immigrants, against James's friends at our Harvard faculty lounge, than they were motivated by these underlying principles. The sort of three-legged stool that Ronald Reagan ran of fiscal conservatism and military strength and social conservatism. I think that there was that element. I think that there was a lot of certainly pure-hearted Reagan supporters. But what happened essentially was when push came to shove, the pure-hearted Reagan supporters decided to give in to their animal impulses in Donald Trump to stay in the mix, to stay on the team, and the rising faction within the party that dates all the way back. You guys probably know better than me, but dates at minimum back to Buchanan and all the way forward, has just this connection with Donald Trump that is much more visceral, much more emotional than what we'd seen with past politicians. And just in short, I basically use, if you look at Buchanan, I use it as like a snowball metaphor on the hill. And if you go back to New Hampshire, 1987 or whatever, and George H.W. Bush at the time has a bigger snowball. Buchanan's just had more momentum, and it just kept rolling down the hill and kept being bigger and bigger, and eventually some of the snow started to pop off of the HW snowball because people got increasingly grossed out by the party, and some of them left the party slowly but surely over time, and more people came in who were attracted to the kind of the Buchanan Trump wing, and this is kind of where we landed today. And you're right, his hold is nothing like it. I quoted, I don't think this made it in the book, but I quoted Jeff Rowe, who is the Ted Cruz advisor, that he said, "Look, Tim, like Trump gets Saddam Hussein level numbers in the Republican base. It was nothing like this for Bush, nothing like this in the past, right?
Yeah.
And so the loyalty is really very different than these past examples."
Yeah, the Pat Buchanan actually was 1992 in New Hampshire, but your point is absolutely right on.
There you go, sir. You're right. Sorry.
See, you weren't born then. He built on the foundation, but I think your point is a very good one. He built on the foundation of hate that certainly Jesse Helms personified in the 80s, Newt Gingrich in the 90s. It's just that Trump did it more effectively and more demagogically even than those demagogues.
Much more. And Trump also had this broader appeal. Buchanan is a little bit of a crank, right? And a real ideologue. And I think part of the appeal to Trump is that he was able to kind of combine this sort of angry Buchananite paleo-conservative element of the base with more of a casual, somebody whose political engagement prior had been casual. A lot of people, frankly, that go to these Trump rallies were turned off by. They don't like Ted Cruz. They don't like the social conservative stalwarts, right? Like they're not weekly churchgoers. They don't care about the sexual the bedroom, sexual mores being the government having control over. And so Trump kind of appealed to this apprentice crowd, in addition to the Buchananite crowd, and created this majority, and everyone else, the people who are the topic of the book, is this old establishment type. Essentially just had a choice about whether they get on board with this thing that was fundamentally different than what they had signed up for, or whether they bail like I did. And I was pretty disheartened that the overwhelming majority decided to get on board.
Yeah, you're in a lonely corner. You know, whatever happens to Trump, I'd like to see him in an orange jumpsuit, but he still has a great hold. You can argue whether it's as much as it was or whether it's going to decline, but it seems to me that even if it does decline, that Trumpism is very alive in the Republican Party as much as ever. Look at the gubernatorial candidates in some states, the senatorial candidates, and there's only, it strikes me, Tim, and I want you to pick up on this. There's only two ways to really address and counter that. One is more and more Republicans have the courage of Liz Cheney. That ain't going to happen. Or secondly, that they're going to suffer a big electoral defeat and have to adjust, and that seems unlikely to happen. So, what's your hopeful scenario?
My hopeful scenario is pretty dark, gentlemen. But look, here, there's another thing that's happening that's important to understand. And my book isn't about this. I'm not a geopolitical expert. But if you just look around the world, the Conservative Party in everywhere in the Western world and in South America, everywhere essentially has become more nationalistic, more in this vein of, not the classical liberal Bush, Blair, Clinton, for all their small disagreements, like this general philosophy of classical liberalism, the globalism, like that's out on the right throughout the world, right? So I think that, we're seeing this Boris Johnson drama right now in England, but I think Boris Johnsonism is really the best case scenario for the Republican Party. The Republican Party is not going back to compassionate conservatism. John Huntsman, my old boss, is not walking through that door with we need to deal with climate and be nice to immigrants and have that kind of conservatism. None of that, that's gone. What could happen, I think, and when I look back, I think what, in retrospect, could have potentially been done to stave off some of the conspiracy and the fear-mongering is, how can you appeal to this working-class Republican Party in a way that actually addresses their genuine grievances, right? Can you have a more, call it protectionist, culturally conservative, a little bit more isolationist GOP that appeals to these voters who were turned off by the Iraq War, whose communities have been hollowed out, and kind of actually try to deliver them policy results rather than just deliver them conspiracies about vaccines and fantasies about election fraud and, demagoguery. I think it's possible, right, that the GOP could sort of pivot into more of a permanent kind of working class nationalist party. That's not going to appeal to me that much, but might be less dangerous than what we're seeing for Trump. The problem is it's kind of like that old line about communism, right? Like true communism has never been tried. I don't know. Has true conservative populism that doesn't lead to demagoguery ever been tried? Maybe. I don't know. Not really. But the Boris Johnson kind of party is I think the most hopeful analog.
Which is not devoid of demagoguery, by the way. But James Carville, take over.
So Tim, what you did better than maybe anybody ever is you explained how addictive campaigning is. Well, I used to call the smell of cordite. There's these stories of these soldiers that just when they leave the battlefield, they just become addicted to the smell of cordite. Mike Murphy calls it the crack pipe. All right. And when you've experienced that kind of combat, tell us about how you just want to fucking win. You become, as David Brock said, blinded by the right, any other people. But I really think that your book is almost literary on this very point, and very few people experience that. All right. I mean, people read about it, cover it, write about it, make movies about it, but when you're not in that headquarters, in that fight every day, I hate these motherfuckers, every one of them. I just want to beat their ass now. Talk a little bit about how addictive it is and how easy it is to get caught up in it.
And particularly at the presidential level, there's just nothing like it, right? The Klieg light, the intensity of presidential politics is so high. And I thought that Olivia Nuzzi did this interview do you remember this in the New York Magazine? It was like with an anonymous Trump staffer. And
I do remember that. I like her. I don't know. I like her.
Yeah, I like her. And she explained, and this person, I assume it's a guy, because he sounded like a guy, explains how he got addicted to, leaking behind the scenes. He wanted to be in the Trump administration, and then he'd leak, and then something. He said all of a sudden, the first time it happened, it's on the front page of all the newspapers, and he says something like, I'm playing with live bullets now, and boy, is it fun. And I read that, and that just made me feel so bad on the inside, because I was like, that resonates with me. That was me. I got into politics, because I loved politics as a kid. I loved the war room, and I loved the game of it, and I was more of a conservative, but I was always kind of a moderate, right? I liked the West Wing, and I liked the pageantry of it all, and the game and the competition. And so I get into it. In 2010, the Tea Party stuff's happening. I'm getting kind of grossed out by the GOP. I get this call from John Huntsman, who I just mentioned, and it's like, this is my guy. Like, this is a moderate Republican. Yeah, he's my type of person. And I went to work for that campaign, and the campaign didn't go well, but I did really well. I eviscerated Mitch Daniels, and basically, our oppo hits on him might have been the reason he didn't run. We went after Mitt. All the reporters are calling me. I had all the oppo. I had all the dirt. And so I got promoted, right? You get promoted up the ladder. Then the RNC calls, say, we want you to do this against Obama, what you did against Mitt. And I did it. And then we lose that race, but people are like, man, Tim was really good at delivering these attacks on Obama. And so then we start a firm that's like, let's start doing this to all Democratic candidates, right? And so something that happened so fast, it was a year and a half. I went from being like, I earnestly want to work for this moderate Republican because I believe he could be a good president, to I'm getting this rush of seeing, my imaginary hand show up on the front page of the New York Times, or seeing myself on television and getting a message from an old friend from high school that's like, man, you did great on that TV hit. And you become enamored with this, and you become enamored with the sport of it, and the desire to win, and the desire to defeat the other side. And all of a sudden, the actual point of politics, which is delivering results for your fellow citizens, like trying to get someone elected who can better serve the country, it just gets totally lost in the campaign culture, to the point it becomes so bad where if you are the person in a room who says, maybe we shouldn't do this because it's a little bit hyperbole, it might inflame people, you become the turd in the punch bowl. Your colleagues are like, if you do that too many times, if you do it one time and you say, okay, we need to not do this because the press will be mad at us, that's one thing. But if every week you're the one saying, this tactic is a little too aggressive, or this tactic is inflaming people, you become the bad person. They send you to the back of the office. So like, all right, what, buddy, you go hang out with the wonks. Like, we don't need you. We're over here, those of us in the game, we're trying to win. And it's intoxicating, the whole element of it. And I think that I would have thought that Trump, just his manifest incompetence and bigotry and idiocy, would have shaken my fellow colleagues from that and been like, you really love this game so much that you're going to do it for this asshole? And like, the answer was, yeah, they do. They love the game so much they would even do it for somebody that they know is dangerous. And so I think that was, I don't know that if you're a banker, you recognize that part of politics, or you really get it. And so I tried to do my best to kind of explain that mindset and how easy it is to get caught up in it.
So it's a short story, and we'll go back to you. When you used to run campaigns, we didn't have electronics, so you'd have these pink callback slips. Yeah. So you'd go out to lunch, you'd walk back, somebody'd hand you 25 of them. Everybody in the world wanted to talk to you. The day after the campaign, you get fucking one. All right? And it's the whole rush. And Thanksgiving, you would just start shaking because you were like a soldier addicted to combat. And all of a sudden, they had a ceasefire, and you didn't know what to do with your time. And I think every person that has really been in the crucible of politics has had that feeling. Like, why is this over?
Chris Christie said, I quote him, Chris Christie basically gives that same story, right? It's like he's out of the governor's office, and he does it, and he thinks this is the corrupting part of this. Me and you right now, we're self-aware enough of how exciting this is, but how dangerous it can be. Christie, totally unself-aware, is doing an interview. I was watching him, and he says, I left the governor's office, and that buzz that you get from somebody needing you, from somebody calling you, it just all goes away like that.
It's a light switch.
I needed to fill it up with something. And so, I didn't. And so the Trump campaign called, and there I was. He was totally unself-aware of how that happened to him. That he, even went along with Trump.
I completely understand. And they don't hit a dimmer, they hit the light switch.
Right.
Okay? It's an on and off switch. It's not like You know, you were the governor, even the ex-president. You can't believe the difference between being the president and the ex-president. Just in terms of everything, you go from a 30-car motorcade to a 3-car motorcade.
Right.
All right. You know, everybody, you know, wants you to reflect and be a chin scratcher as opposed to being in the middle of it. But anyway,
the private
for the
jets
reason
too,
anybody,
by the way.
right, wants
That's the
to
one thing.
understand.
You go from being on.
I think,
you go from doing coach. That's a big.
Right.
It's a big drop off, and all of a sudden it's like, well, if I'm from Trump, I get to start doing the FBOs again. It becomes easy to sell yourself on it. This is rights. You know, I had a whole chapter on rights and how rights became addicted to all this.
I think that you, better than anyone that has written about this, understood this and admitted. So I gotta. So I'm. See, if we go through different things in lives, we work for people that made mistakes. We all know that. We understand that. I've worked for 22 different countries. You know, and people say we did this, but I did that. Not going to answer it, and I'm very comfortable with whatever. I don't give a fuck. All right. But the one thing I got to ask you and your friends about, and I understand the Iraq War. Maybe that was a mistake. It was a kind of ball frog thing. It looked good when it started. Okay, John McCain, I understand he has this sort of heroic thing. When did you know that Sarah Palin was the most massive mistake that could possibly be made by any presidential candidate? I mean, not just you can see somebody in a desire to win.
Yeah.
This was just and by the way, I asked Sarge, I had him come to my Tulane class. Sarge, by the way, is Steve Schmidt. You came after the thing, and I asked him about it, and he was kind of uncomfortable. Well, you realize things. I didn't press him. But you know a lot of people, everybody had to have this one phone call where you just said, God, did we fuck up here? Was there ever an epiphanous moment where you're not going to Damascus and you got knocked off your horse? So what happened? Explain that.
I mean, they all knew pretty quick. I talked to Mark Salter for the book, who was McCain's speechwriter, and he had an epiphanous moment very early during the prep, you know, because he had to write her speech, and that part went well, and then he starts prepping her for interviews, and he's like, oh my God, this woman is going to be a disaster. He had that moment. He was on the inside. My experience with McCain was interesting, and I think speaks to what we were just talking about, the rush and the lack of, and how it can block your clarity. So I was on McCain's primary campaign in 2007, and you might remember the campaign tanks, and he used to fire a bunch of people. I was in the group, that first group. And they asked me to stay, but I was dealing with my sexuality, and I was like, I'm going to come out of the closet. Everyone who'd hired me on this campaign had just got fired. I was supposed to be loyal. This is a lesson I learned in politics. They all tell you should be loyal to your boss or whatever. That is just stupid. Nobody has any loyalty to their staff in politics. You do what's right for you, young person listening to this podcast. But anyway, I was convinced I had to be loyal to my boss. So I resigned when he quit, or when he got fired. And so I was outside when the Palin attack happened. And to me, it just couldn't have been more clear. I was outside the campaign, and I was like, this woman has nothing. Like, this woman would be a nightmare. And you know, the Katie Couric interview is obviously the thing that kind of stands out, banging it from the outside. This was one case where I wasn't sort of on the inside. And my friends who worked on the campaign, I interviewed a lot of them for the book. And this, what's the word? Like, this bunker mentality sets in. You know, like, they saw the same thing I saw, but they didn't have the clarity because they were still inside this game. They were still inside the competition, and they got mad at the way the media was unfair. And Katie Couric asked her unfair questions, and this is elitism, and this is whatever, right? And you convince yourself about this. And so I think that Steve and Nicole were rare inside the campaign in that they saw it and felt like they needed to do something about it when it was too late, unfortunately. But a lot of my friends who were in the campaign didn't have that clarity that I had being on the outside. And I think that just speaks to how the competition, the team, you know, can blind you to certain things. I saw it clear. I saw it clearly, and it's why. And for me, I look back on my career, and I'm like, man, maybe I should have just become a journalist or whatever back in 2008. I don't know. I saw where this thing was going, and instead, I just kind of got sucked back in. The old Godfather analogy.
Well, I kind of remember, I turned over to Al, a Glenn Campbell song or something. There's a load of compromising on the way to my horizon.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much truth in that, because when you're in, you know, when you're in combat, when you're sitting next to the people with you, and you just want to win, and some point a Vermont soldier's like knew, oh my God, we've been lied to the whole time. It's been a whole bullshit endeavor. All right, it happens in politics, but I really want to congratulate you for probably not enough political professional addicts out there to make you a bestseller, but to those of us who are out there, it's not just people that work on campaigns. Yeah, it's not just
but
people.
We got more to go.
Yeah, if people work on statewide. But Al, let me turn it back to you. But I
just want to just get on that point though. If you are a political addict that you're listening to, that was just James saying you got to get this. This is going to feed your little. This is going to feed your little fix. All right, so go out there and buy.
This is right in the vein, man.
Yeah, right in the vein.
Tim, let me ask you about some contemporary figures or types. In your former party now. Some drank the Kool-Aid, but I think there were a lot more who were opportunists, like little Lindsay. But I think the embodiment of that latter group may be Elise Stefanik, who was she headed the Moderate House Wednesday group, saw the handwriting on the wall, and became a Trump sycophant, if you will. She's got a big future in this party right now, though, doesn't she?
Huge future. It's paid off. This is why the book is kind of depressing, because it doesn't offer a lot of hope for change. And at the same time, it demonstrates that a lot of the people who gave in to these rationalizations, these compromises that James is talking about, were rewarded for it. Elise is the most stark. I focus on her because I worked with her at the RNC. We worked together, believe it or not, on that famed autopsy, where we wanted the party to become more compassionate and welcoming.
Reince Priebus, right?
With Reince. And so I use all of the characters that worked with me on the autopsy as kind of emblematic of, it's interesting, we all put out this one document where we agreed on where the party should go. The party went a completely different way. And so some of us said, okay, screw you, see you later, and others went along. Like, why? What was the difference between us? Elise is the most dramatic example of that. She runs in 2014, like the pure Tim Miller campaign. If I could make a campaign in a lab to appeal to me, it was, we got to deal with climate change. We have to change on gay rights. We have to be welcoming to immigrants and refugees, but, we still need a strong military. And on balance, I think government should be a little smaller. This is like my pure, future conservative campaign. That's what she runs in 2014. The most event, like anyone, the people, I interviewed everyone that worked with her on her campaign. They all said it was the proudest moment I ever had in politics. This was exactly what I hoped the party would be. What are we now? 7 years later, 8 years later? Not a single person on that campaign still works for her. One of the people, she spoke at their wedding, and then a year later fired them on a conference call because they had suggested too many times that she toned down the Trump stuff a little bit. She just made a pure. There was no compromising here. This was not the Glenn Campbell situation. This is an about face. She saw that the only path to the top and to power was through Trump, and there were a couple of eye-opening moments for her. Her colleagues kind of walked me through, why they thought she changed like that. And now I do think it's going to pay off. I think that she's on the short list both for Speaker of the House and Vice President. In the next 5 to 10 years, and she did it at the cost of basically all of the people that helped her get there.
It's a sad story. I think there were a few people in the Trump administration who I can admire. They were in there to prevent worse things from happening. Jim Mattis comes to mind, but there weren't very many. Now, you write one chapter about someone who I think is a friend of yours, Alyssa Farah. And she didn't leave the White House, Tim, though, until a month after the election. She put out a statement saying it was the honor of her lifetime, the great successes and the effective job they did on the COVID crisis and other great successes. Those were lies. And then she turns critic, gets a gig on CNN. Why are these Monday morning quarterbacks like her any better than the Corey Lewandowskis?
It's a great question, Al. Alyssa's not my friend, actually, or we're not friends, but I'd never met her before the book. I found her story interesting because she bailed. And just for clarity, I did my best to be fair to her. Here's why I think I was maybe nicer to Alyssa, because the reality is, if the question of the book is why did people go along with something they know is bad, one of the things you have to answer is, well, okay, how did people shake free of that? Like, what was it that made people shake free? And for Alyssa, I thought I had a jaded view of her, just like you laid out. My view is she wants to be a TV star. She wants to get these big contracts, and she knows if she has Trump stink on her, she can't do it. That I went and we met multiple times and had drinks, and there were tears. And I mean, this was just a person that was grappling with this. She knew she made a bad mistake. I don't want to defend her decisions at all. I mean, I told her, we yelled at each other. You can read the chapter. I mean, we're screaming back and forth. Like, well, how did you go serve this guy? You knew it was a disaster. Why didn't you quit? Why didn't you tell people to vote for Joe Biden? Why didn't you warn the country? So I'm not, this is not a defense of her, but it's interesting to me that what actually shook her free. And in the end, I think that what shook her free is that she saw that it was over. She didn't buy the lies about the election fraud. And so she had this clarity from being outside the groupthink, outside this rush that James and I were just talking about. And she was like, my kids are going to look at me and think that I'm a monster. Like, they're going to think I'm history's greatest monster. And I can't. I have to do I have to do the right thing on this, and I have to stick with it. And why I think Alyssa's interesting is because there were a handful of people that were with her in that moment. Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, most of the Republicans basically all agreed with her in that moment. This is too bad. I've got to break. All of them are back in his clutches, except for basically her and, now this young woman, Cassidy, who I think was really brave. And so what made it stick? I thought it was interesting to explore that. It's not to, turn her into a hero, but I do think it's a category difference than, the other slime and sleaze that are still staying around him or keeping their head underwater. I mean, you have this, just really quick, this Bill Stepien asshole who says, I'm on team normal. And it's like, you're not on team normal. You stayed through this whole time.
And now he's with Trump.
And now he's still with Trump.
Right.
And by the way, he's also consulting for Harriet Hageman in her primary against Liz Cheney, where they still are spreading the big lie. You're not on team normal. You're an asshole. You just are smarter than the crazy people who are spouting the same thing. Like, you're worse than them, actually. Give me the crazy Kraken lady and the pillow guy who's on drugs. Like, they at least believe this nonsense, I think. Like Stepien is going. So to me, Stepien and his ilk are the villains, and Alyssa is a flawed person that did the right thing in the end, and maybe there's something we can learn from that.
No, I think you make an interesting point. I mean, she's no Stepien, she's also no Jim Mattis, but, I think that's a fair point. Let me ask you, James and I have a rare disagreement. I want you to weigh in.
I love that. I'll adjudicate. I like ranking.
Yes. All right, Judge Miller, here it is. I believe in February of 2021, Mitch McConnell could have delivered more than enough Republican votes to impeach the former president and ban him from running again. There would have been a huge firestorm, and I think they would have gotten it over it and turned to Ron DeSantis, whatever have you. James says that would have been political suicide.
No, he would have been ousted as the majority leader if he'd have tried that.
He would have been ousted as the majority leader?
I don't know if play that.
Okay, well, boy, this is tough. I wanted to have a clear answer to this because I think the answer is both. I think that politically James's assessment is right, but practically Al's is. I think that I think he could have done it. I think that they were close. And this is what bothers me. It's like it was 17, so you had to get 10 more. It was kind of tough. I did the math back at the time, and I didn't think it was really going to happen. But I was, once you get up into 15, 16, you're looking for, man, who am I going to scrounge up here? Can we get John Cornyn to be number 17? The names start to get pretty depressing.
Mike Rounds, I mean, that's, there are enough.
But here, I think in the grand, I think that short-term political calculation, James is right. Long scope, I do find it really hard to believe that here we are, 2022, inflation is happening, people are unhappy with Biden, Ron DeSantis is doing his imitation Trump shtick. I think that most people would have got over it. I think there would have been a short-term pain for the Republicans, but I think that most people would have gotten over it and would have gotten on board with Ron DeSantis. You did it, then have this wild card of, okay, well, just because you convict Donald Trump doesn't mean he disappears. He wasn't going to go down to Midland and paint like George W. Bush, and he was going to take, he would have lit a fire to the building. So, it's hard to know the counterfactual, but anyway, I think that it was, my opinion is the short-term pain, if you're Mitch McConnell, was probably worth it for the long term, but then you're in service of Ron DeSantis and you lose your majority leadership. So it might have been worth it for the history books, but not worth it for him in the short term.
That's a very judicious answer, Judge Miller. I'll turn it back to James.
My position was he could have done it, but he would have been ousted.
Okay, James, I give it to James then. Sorry.
And he didn't. He would not have survived a vote in his own caucus.
That caucus didn't have a good replacement. But anyway, we'll never settle that.
We'll never settle up. But that's my view, and I think that's yours too. So Al and I have been talking since maybe the late 80s, and I always say you're always looking for the good Republican. And boy, it was going to be Lamar Alexander. It was going to be Rob Portman. It was going to be
They weren't my candidates, James. I want to point out. I had Richard Lugar and John McCain.
Whatever, but they didn't exist under Trump, okay?
Right.
All right? They didn't exist. And all of the people that anybody thought was going to be, short of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who probably not going to be, or Kinzinger's definitely not, and Liz likely won't be. If there's some sort of people like you that are looking maybe for a sliver of hope, are there any like 2 or 3 people that you see that might be butting into something sort of, I don't know what you call it?
There's no sliver of hope at the national level, at least in the near term, maybe medium term. But at the state level, there are a lot of good Republican, not a lot, there are a handful of good Republican governors. Larry Hogan is good, Charlie Baker, Phil Scott, right. Spencer Cox in Utah is a good governor. So there are a handful of state and local Republicans that have managed to maintain their integrity and survive this. So if you're a 23-year-old kid who wants to work in Republican politics listening, I'd point you to the states to get out of the swamp. But here's my problem. Here's the thing that frustrates me, and now I'm going to turn this question back onto James for a second. Right. Is like, because all of my people who say this to me are like, okay, I guess we need to start a third party, and I'm like, why can't there just be more of an appeal at this moment? Why can't people just say, you know what, I'm a John Tester, Joe Manchin, Joe Biden, Kirsten Sinema, Democrat. I don't get it. Like, I get it if you're an ideologue on abortion or whatever, and you just can never vote for a Democrat. But the Biden administration has done what? I mean, they overspent on the COVID bill. I'm just putting my Republican Paul Ryan hat on. They overspent on that first COVID bill. But then they've done 2 bipartisan bills. The Ukraine has been handled very well. Afghanistan was handled poorly. It's like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I just don't. For some reason, we can't have this thing like we used to. I mean, there used to be these Rockefeller Republicans, these conservative Democrats. Like, why can't people just say that? Like, I'm with Joe Biden when it comes to democracy and these other pressing issues. I'm reasonable gun reform. These other pressing issues. I'm against Joe Biden on abortion and some foreign policy stuff. But I'm a Democrat. For some reason, people can't get over that hump, and the Democrats are doing a really bad job selling people that they can. And I think that's a more realistic landing place right now than hoping the Republican Party is going to magically bring Richard Lugar back. Like, that ain't happening.
So what I believe and what I tell people, and believe me, I'm aware of what the Democratic Party is, what it is today, anything. The only hope for the United States, the only one, all right, bar none, no argument, no anything, is the Democratic Party. That's it. On a national scene.
So there's a lot of pressure on you to start doing better.
I understand that.
If you're the hope of the free world, you got to start doing a little better.
There are successful Republican governors. There are disastrous Democratic mayors. Don't get me started, okay? I wrote a piece in a local paper. I understand that. Some of the policies that are advocated disaster, but on a national level, that's it for the foreseeable future. And I'm not, and that's a very dicey bet, I might add, in my opinion, a very dicey bet. But there's no other alternative. And we'll talk about it in Outrage. But Tim, from my vantage point, I'll see you Wednesday night at Garden District Books in New Orleans. But I say this, I'm a bullshitter, all right. And it might be some bullshit, but not very much. I think this has the potential to be the best political book since What It Takes by Richard Ben Kramer. on the '88 campaign, and that's high fucking praise. Let me tell you,
That's
that's the
high
highest
cotton,
fucking praise you can get.
You're getting me blushing.
I'm serious. No,
now.
but I'm serious. What you did to the extent that anybody, I don't know how many people care about what it's like to be in this, in the utter addictive nature. And I see these young people. I'll get them a job on a campaign that they're full of idealism and this, and 2 days on it, they call me back and said, fuck it, I just want to win. I hate these bastards we're running against. And it's almost a universal reaction when you see it. And, it's like the minute you get your jersey dirty, that's it. Okay, this bullshit's over. I'm not nervous anymore. But I congratulate you, on a great book, and I'll see you in New Orleans, and we'll get a cold one here.
I'll see you in New Orleans on Thursday night. Don't show up
Thursday?
the wrong day.
15th.
And I'm sure you got some other New Orleans readers here. Next Thursday night, the 14th.
I'll bring them.
Come on by.
I'll
Anybody.
drag them
All
on.
welcome.
You bet. Albert,
Tim, I just want to say you equivocated as a judge, but boy, you're a great guest. You're a great author. And everybody out there, whether you are a political junkie or not, get this book, Why We Did It, and you'll learn about the sad, sad fate of the Republican Party. Tim, thank you so much.
You bet.
Yeah, I love you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for correcting me on that history note. I got to get my primaries right.
See,
I've got you two old timers around to get my primary years right.
There are very few benefits in being old, but that's one of them.
See you, Al. Thanks, man.
Okay. Hey, warm weather is here, James Carville, for us. So that means hot, sleepless nights, particularly if you're down where you live often. But we recently have found a great way to stay cool at night, so you don't wake up all sweaty and sticky, since we started using Miracle brand self-cooling bed sheets. We stay comfortable every night, and with silver-infused fabrics originally developed by NASA, Miracle brand sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long. Its unique self-cooling properties ensure you'll get better sleep every night. Even better, they're self-cleaning thanks to their infusion of natural silver that prevents 99.9% of bacterial growth. They stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets, so forget those gross odors. Miracle sheets also are luxuriously comfortable without the high price tag of other luxury brands. The sheets use a premium 500 thread count sateen weave that's made with USA-grown Supima cotton, one of the highest quality cottons in the world. Plus, they're better for your skin. So stop sleeping on bacteria with Miracle brand sheets. There's less bacteria to clog your pores, which means fewer breakouts and other skin problems. It's great for that summer heat down there, James.
It's great for the summer heat, and I got news for you. It's not just down there. It's getting hot everywhere, and guess what it's going to do? It's going to get hotter. Everybody should think about this. You spend about 1/3 of your life between the sheets. If ideally you get 8 hours sleep, maybe you don't get that, but it's pretty close. And boy, that's 1/3 of your life that you're going to spend somewhere. You want it to be as safe and comfortable and cool as possible. You're not buying this product, you're investing in it. And by the way, given the way that this climate is going, it's going to be more and more and more in demand. So get it now and save money, because the price of this can't do anything but go up, because demand. This is a superb, ahead of the curve product that's going to just go up and up and up.
Yeah, I agree. So go to trymiracle.com/war room to try them today. And we got a special deal for our listeners. Be sure to use our promo code WARROOM at checkout to save 40% off and get 3 free towels. 40% off and 3 free towels. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. So upgrade your sleep with Miracle brand. Go to trymiracle.com/war room and use the code WARROOM to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/war room, or look for the link in our show notes. Thank you, Miracle brand, for sponsoring this episode. All right, James, now for our listener questions, which as always are terrific. A lot this week. Kevin, who's in Vashon Island, Washington. This is a good question. Says, what are your thoughts regarding Moore v. Harper? That was the environmental case decided by the Supreme Court involving West Virginia and coal. And Kevin goes on to say, Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Kavanaugh have already signaled their intentions to remove court oversight of state elections. So that's the question generally. But talk about Moore v. Harper.
Right. So it's weird because I think you and I had a conversation with this, had several conversations about this morning. And from my understanding of it, of course, I didn't read the decision. And I probably
Water Dellinger.
Right, we do, but we can say people thought it was terrible. It was awful. But people thought it was going to be even worse. And I suspect in chambers, when they saw the reaction to the Dobbs and the gun case, they said it was terrible, but many of the commentators thought it was going to be even worse. And I think that's where Roberts had the thing is, let's don't do this all at one time. Let's chip away with it. I from my understanding of the commentary on it, people thought it was going to be god-awful. It turned out to just be awful. And that's where we are in terms of when we see things, we're grateful for just awful. But I'm not at some point we need to have a good legal guest on here to explain what's going on. We had Linda, when this came out, but before we talked about this case in anticipation. But I don't know, but a lot of people who I respect their judgment says this thing is bad, but could have been worse.
Yeah, James, I think you're right, but the history of this court of the conservatives here is that they start there and then they build on it. That's what they did with guns, with the Heller decision, and then they came the New York decision. So I think you're absolutely right, but that doesn't mean that the next time it won't be god-awful.
No, they're coming back with more.
As long as they retain
they're like ants in the kitchen. They just keep coming.
Gordon in Norwood, Michigan, cites Walter Dellinger, who was, God, we miss him every day. Walter said it would be, this is talking about Roe decision, it would be a blow to the legitimacy of the court. But the question that Gordon asked is, is there any legitimacy left of the court? I think Walter would accept my modification here. Yes, the court is legitimate. We're a nation that is ruled by laws, and we have a Supreme Court. If we don't like their decisions, we still have to obey them. What it is it's an illicit court. It's a politically illicit court. It was put together by Mitch McConnell, cheating, legally cheating, I suppose, but cheating. And they have a bunch of right-wing ideologues on there who are determined to remake America, as Linda Greenhouse said last week, basically a white Christian nation. And I think we all need to obey Supreme Court decisions. They're legitimate in that sense. But I hope every Democrat in the country runs against them this year. They are, I think, changing the country in a way that most Americans really don't want.
I don't think they give a shit about their legitimacy. All they care about is their power. And we hear all this crap in foreign affairs about soft power, and we hear this stuff, we used to hear, well, so-and-so is an institutionalist, okay? They don't give a crap. Understand this. The only thing they care about is power. And I'll go one step further. I think this court is driven, I really believe this, by religious fanaticism. And you look across the board, you're going to see more and more of this. And I'm sorry, I hate to say this, but I'm not going to mumble institutionalists and legitimacy and stare decisis, precedent, any of that shit. We want people to tell the truth. These guys just go to senators, congressional committees, anything else, and they lie through their teeth, and they don't give a shit. You understand that? They don't give a shit. Understand that and act accordingly.
James, we have a question from Canada, Linda, who says, what is it in the American cultural tradition that encourages the idea that one can impose on one's personal ethics on others? Is it merely a matter of politics?
So that's always been a thing. And I'm going to go back to the court, and you see a lot of the commentary is, and I'm probably not answering your question exactly right, but allow me to be circuitous here. And they said, look, they overturned Plessy And so this is the equivalent of Plessy. Actually, the foundational aspect of Plessy is that the state legislature had the ability to decide who went to what school, which is the same argument that was made in Dobbs. And one of the bases for overturning Plessy is that they alluded to the fact that there was no harm done here. The state of Louisiana wanted certain people to ride in the back of the bus, in the front of the bus, which I think was the basis of Plessy. I think it had to do with a bus ride that expounded beyond that. And what Chief Justice Warren and the court said in 1954 is we demonstratively now know that this is harmful to people. And that was part of the basis for overturning it. What has happened is we now know a lot of the reasons that you want to have these abortion bans have turned out to be not true, that were dangerous to the mother, it's actually safer than childbirth, or that there was psychological detriment to doing this because it just that people would be that. We demonstrably know, as in terms of research, that none of this is true. What they believe is that they have a better way, and if people would just do it their way, it'd be better, and they're willing to use the law to do that. This goes back a long time in the history of the Supreme Court. This is nothing new. They have tried to impose their version of what America should be as opposed to what America wants to be. And that your question is spot on, and this is just a perfect example of it.
Yeah, it sure is. Sandra in Staten Island, New York. Good question here, James. Do you think it's wise that Democratic campaigns have been running ads to bolster Trumpian Republican primary candidates? She cites Josh Shapiro and Democrats in Pennsylvania doing that for Mastriano. Isn't that playing with fire given the current midterm headwinds? First of all, Sandra, both sides do it. They've done it for a long time. You try to pick the weaker candidate. Maybe it worked in Pennsylvania. Maybe it worked in Illinois. I'm not sure. But I agree with you. It's playing with fire. The classic case that we all remember, those of us old enough remember, was 1966, when the Democrats really they didn't want to run against George Christopher for governor. The mayor of San Francisco would be the strongest Republican candidate. So they did everything they could to hurt George Christopher and help a movie actor named Ronald Reagan, because we knew he'd be easy to beat. I think it's playing with fire. They've done it for a long time. It's going to continue to do it. I think there's a better use of resources.
Well, first of all, I've always believed that there's nothing more amusing than than a fool that doesn't know they're a fool. And I don't expect you to comment on this. And you see a lot of these guys, particularly down south, they just pontificate at the bar. And I think that that's all based on a column that David Brooks wrote, who I think is the prime example of a fool that doesn't know he's a fool. First of all, there's nothing wrong with doing it. It's not immoral. By the way, in this case, don't know if there's causation or correlation, but you're seeing all of these Republicans coming out for Josh Shapiro. We're kind of waiting on Tom.
Right.
We're waiting on Tom Ridge. Understand? This is the person whose opinion that we're waiting on. All right. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I can remember when Rush Limbaugh tried to get Republicans to vote in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania. The facts escape me right now, but anybody can find out. So Brooks writes a column saying the January 6th committee has failed before it started. That was idiotic. It was profoundly idiotic. The idea that there's something immoral or wrong about them trying to do it, I can't tell you that it's good. In some instances it may work, in some instances it may not work. There's certainly no morality involved in this at all. And in this instance, maybe he would have won without it. Again, I can't argue that, but there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, I'm not going to join you on David Brooks. He's a good friend of my wife's. But in any event, moving on.
I didn't ask you to.
I know you did. I appreciate that, James. The next question is from a frustrated teacher, Heather. Now, Heather, you got a good question, and we're gonna read it and have James answer it. But Heather, when you're writing again, tell us where you're from. I know you're a frustrated teacher, but I want to know where you're from, Heather, because you could be from probably 50 states. She says the Democrats have one issue. She thinks they're the law and order party. They're defending the rights of people to an equal shot at fulfilling life, liberty, liberty and calling for consequences for those who break the law or aspire to be the law. Why can't they seize on that, James?
So this is a question I have, and I want to ask friends of mine in the polling thing. So what we do is a battery where we say, who do you think is better, Republicans or Democrats? All right, and so it's up protecting Social Security and Medicare. Democrats will win plus 20. All right, fighting crime, Republicans generally win by a lot. I wonder after this gun stuff if this is like narrowed considerably. It's something I'm going to be looking for. So I'm so glad we got this question because I just read a story this morning, and I'm sure it's true, about the profound negative educational effects that COVID has had on kids.
Yeah.
And if this country, if there's anything in the world that we're going to need for the next, we've always needed teachers in fundamental ways that we can't imagine. Man, we're going to need good teachers, and so many of them, for such a long period of time, because this thing has dug ourselves into a hole that in terms of childhood development, not just emotional development, physical development, but particularly intellectual development, this is going to affect this country. It's going to affect our grandchildren, Albert. It's just not going to affect our children. This is how profound this is. And this is how necessary and important teachers are. We got to teach. We got to start teaching teachers with the same reverence that we have treated veterans. And we're just going to have to decide that we're going to really have to increase teacher pay in this country to levels that we could hardly anticipate before.
And teacher respect.
I really mean that. And respect.
Yep.
And we got to have Teachers' Day. We got to do all kinds of things. I mean, I'm not going to live long enough to see it. I understand that. But wow, this is going to be something going forward, man. Teacher of every kind in this country, man. If you're 22 years old and you're a sixth grade teacher, you're going to do more to shape the future of this country than almost anybody.
Yep. James Marcus in Omaha, Nebraska says, I'm a local elected Republican. He said a Reagan Republican, not a Trump Republican. Read our conversation with Tim earlier. And he really enjoys the two of us talking through the issues, though he always doesn't agree with us. I can understand that. Sometimes I'm not sure I agree with myself,
I
Marcus.
agree too. Yeah, we don't agree. We have our shared disagreements too.
Right. This is a good question. Regarding student debt, I would be interested in exploring options to help people out. But until we fix the current cost of higher education, wouldn't eliminating student debt just further push costs higher by greedy universities? Marcus, I consider myself a liberal, and I am for addressing a lot of problems. I have enormous problems with forgiving all student debt for 3 or 4 reasons. Number one, that would go disproportionately to upper middle income recipients. Number two, I think there are those who say, wait a minute, I paid off my student debts. Why are we going to forgive everybody now? And thirdly, the point you make, it may just accelerate the higher cost. There may be a way to forgive some for lower income individuals, a means-tested forgiveness at a lower level. But you really touched on something, Marcus. Tuitions at public universities have gone up about 200% over the last 20 years. For private universities, about 150%. That's not sustainable. I want teachers to be well paid. I want universities to have, excellent curriculum. But a lot of that is going, I think, for too much bureaucracy and padding too much in the way of fancy playgrounds and everything for college students. We can't keep up that pace.
I could not agree more. I agree with our Republican friend who's an elected official in Omaha. The other thing is, let me say this. You signed a contract. All right? Now, are there instances where, particularly with veterans, are a big victim of this? They come back.
For-profit colleges.
For-profit. Okay, I'm totally sympathetic to that. I'm totally sympathetic that some of this is like fraud. We can set up to do something like this. But I always tell the story of my students. You got Jag and Jill. They're both excellent students. Jag says, I want to go to Tulane. I want a prestigious sheepskin. By the way, Tulane's doing really, really well now. He gets $250,000 in debt. Jill says, I'll just go to LSU. I'll get a less prestigious thing. I won't rack up debt. I'll get a part-time job. I'm working at the student union. So now we go and say, okay, Jill, you pay off Jack's loan. Well, there are opportunities available to you, and if you want to go to Tulane or you want to go to Wake Forest, that's great. They're great institutions. Pay for it yourself, or if you borrow money to go there, pay it back. It's that simple. I'm maybe more of a hard ass than our friend from Omaha is.
Yeah. And even though in public institutions, 200% increase in tuition over the last 20 years. Some of that may the blame may lie with
these
Republican legislators.
A lot of it does.
But it is not sustainable.
Watch the movie Starving the Beast. It'll explain a lot to you.
Marcus, that's a great question.
Great question.
All right, James, I have finally found the good Republican. It's Marcus in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay, go, Marcus, go.
Finally, Jonathan in California. Jonathan, good question, but again, next time you write and tell us where in California, it's a pretty big state.
Right.
He wants to know, he says, I live in California, but I want to support senators in jeopardy in swing states. He's talking about Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, and Nevada. What's the best way to do that?
I believe in direct contributions. I think the most Alabama Council, there's any number of things that you can do, but let's say if I don't know what your circumstances are, but somebody wants to give $1,000. The first thing I'd do is I'd just do a little research and look at it as an investment. I could tell you any number, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, a lot of places come to mind, but always pick a race. For complicated reasons that you and I would understand, but too difficult going, and even I don't fully understand them. But the best dollar that a campaign can get is an actual contribution to the campaign because they have more leeway in what they can do with it, and they actually get a favored rate. So as opposed to me telling you what to do, I could rattle off 7 places: Arizona, New Hampshire, maybe even Colorado and Washington State. Maybe they're looking a little bit better. But find something you're interested in where you particularly like to match up, write a check, and then follow it. That's my recommendation to anybody.
Well, that's a good recommendation. And Jonathan, next time, tell us where you're from. Keep those questions coming in. They're terrific. I apologize for only getting to a limited amount. They're so good, it's awfully hard to choose each week. But if you send it in again, hopefully we'll choose it next week. All right, James, now for the outrage of the week. I am outraged at liberal critics of Liz Cheney, like Democratic election lawyer Mark Elias, who complains she's a real conservative on most issues. Yes, she is. That makes her forthright courage against Trump's assault on the Constitution more compelling. This is about democracy, not taxes or defense spending or abortion. At critical times, conservatives have stood up to earlier threats. Margaret Chase Smith to Joe McCarthy or Sam Irving during Watergate. Liz Cheney follows in their footsteps. As citizens, whatever your politics, we should all be grateful.
I don't want to exaggerate here, Albert, but there's so much in one story that tells such a bigger story. The story on CNN, it was posted, I think, yesterday by a guy named Isaac Edward DeVore. I don't know him, but I've read it, and he seems like a good, knowledgeable reporter. And what happened was, idiotically, the White House, the Build Back Better, I shouldn't say, the Build Back Better Act, had this conference call after the decision came down. And they had a bunch of celebrities out there, and one of them was a actress or actor, whatever you call them these days, by the name of Deborah Massey, who was outraged. She famous because she played a part on Will and Grace, which is a cutting edge thing. And they were complaining about the Democrats, which that's all they do in Hollywood. And I would like for this quote to be, it wasn't in quotations. I want to be careful about this, but the reporter reported this. Messing said she'd gotten Joe Biden elected and wanted to know why she wasn't being asked to do anything at all. Well, if that is true, Ms. Messing, you didn't get Joe Biden elected. And I had dealt with these Hollywood people. And whether or not she said that exactly, they have a very, very exaggerated opinion of themselves. Now, I could say that the Build Back Better people were really stupid to have a conference call with these people because they knew exactly what they were going to get. That was a dumb move to start with. All right, I have dealt with these people. They have I'm sure she's a very talented person, a very smart person. I don't know if you said that, but if you did say that, you're an idiot. Do you think you had more to do with getting Joe Biden elected to James Clyburn? No, you did not. Not remotely, not in any way, shape, or form. And until these coastal elites understand how limited in politics their influence and power is, we're going to continue to be dictated by them. And until people that work in Build Back Better at the White House get that starry glaze where they just want to talk to celebrities, they're not going to do well. I thought this story was instructive on many, many fronts. If that guy misquoted her, it was not in quotations, all right? But when somebody says something like that, it should be very carefully sourced. I don't know if Ms. Messing is right. I don't know if Mr. DeVore was right. I have read him. He appears to me to be a solid journalist. And actually her saying that sounds believable to me. It really sounds believable, dealing with these people.
And I'm afraid you're right. It does sound believable. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we'd appreciate it if you'd check out the links to our sponsors, Magic Spoon and Miracle Brand, in our show notes. We thank you for supporting them. When you do, it helps make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.